Okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. Today's speaker, Dr. Keith Seitter, has been the Executive Director of the American Meteorological Society since 2004, after serving in other leadership roles in AMS since 1991. Prior to joining the staff at AMS, he was on the faculty in the meteorology program at UMass-Lowell. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Seitter to NOAA.
Thank you, everyone. It's really a thrill to be here. It's always great to get to this building, and it's been a while actually since I've been to the library here, and it was nice to have a chance to do that again. Really wanted to spend the talk today talking primarily about the AMS Bulletin and how that's going to be changing as we move into the year 2020. I'm hoping that that everybody here, Aaron, it's not switching. Maybe, did I do something? That works, okay. I'm hoping everybody here already knows a lot about AMS, but just as an obligatory slide, just say a little bit about us as an organization. This shows our mission statement. We were formed in 1919, so this is our 100th anniversary year. And that's an important part of this whole discussion, is that we are turning 100 or have just turned 100. And that's a time for reflection and a time for looking ahead at how we become the organization we want to be moving into our second century. And so that's a big part of what we're talking about with the Bulletin. But just to reflect a little bit about AMS and what we do, we are a membership organization. We publish journals. We have 11 journals. We do a lot of conferences and meetings over the course of the year. In fact, this week is our Washington Forum here in town in DC. And that's one of the reasons that I'm down here this particular week. But we do that, we have meetings throughout the course of the year. We have educational programs, a lot of terrific student programs, and we work to certify broadcast meteorologists, certified consulting meteorologists, and also now we will be certifying K-12 teachers very soon, which is a new program as part of some of the things that we're doing in the Centennial. The bottom of this slide here is an important part, an important aspect of AMS, and that is that our goal and our role is to really be a trusted voice for the science and really represent the atmospheric and related sciences in ways that that allow us to have our entire community move forward. So that's really something that we take very seriously. These are 10 of our 11 journals. And all of them are among the top journals in their fields and in the subdisciplines that they cover. Some terrific kind of news about the journals right now. The journals are all doing really well. The review times for the journals are as fast as they have ever been. The production time, the time to get to full publication, is as fast as it's ever been. So we really are moving the journals forward, so they're very competitive with other journals in the field. And the quality of our journals is unsurpassed in our science. And so we really put a lot of emphasis in our journals to make sure that they maintain very high quality, both in terms of the quality of the science they're representing and the editorial quality, the production quality of the product itself. And so we really have worked hard to maintain that, which has been a stress on our systems as the world has been changing in the world of publications. And so it's much harder to do that now than it was a decade or two ago. We're working very hard to sort of maintain that high level of quality along with high rapid review times, speed to publication, all those things that are important to authors. So I said those were 10 of the 11. The 11th one is the Bulletin of the AMS. And so the Bulletin is our membership magazine, but it's also a journal. It publishes peer-reviewed research. It consistently ranks within the top 3 journals in the atmospheric and related sciences in terms of impact factor. Some years it's first, some years it's second, some years it's third, but it's always kind of bouncing around those top 3 impact factors. So it beats all of our other journals in terms of impact factor. Very high quality publication, covers a lot of different disciplines within our field and really reaches a broad audience. So we are in this year publishing the 100th volume year, of the Bulletin, and starting in January will be our 101st volume year. And it's really with that in mind that we're looking at how do we make the Bulletin be a more effective publication for today's world. And that's really what I want to focus on. But I want to back up for a minute before doing that and say a little bit more about the Centennial. We are doing a lot of things as we reflect on AMS as we reach our 100th birthday. And one of the things that happened this past January is the Council approved a new set of strategic goals. These refreshed the goals that were approved by the Council in 2007, so it's been a while since we've kind of reworked our strategic goals. The goals themselves did not change very much. They've sort of been had the language refreshed a little bit. They feel a little more modern in terms of the way they refer to things. But what we added this time were not just strategic goals, but actually a set of core values for the society. And this is the first time we've articulated actual core values for the AMS. So it's these 4 bullets that are on the slide here that represent the core values of the society. I think they have always been our core values, but this is the first time that we've tried to actually put them in writing. And I think they really represent the kind of an organization that our community wants us to be, and the kind of organization that will allow us to best serve our community. And really it's built around the integrity of science and the scientific process. And I think that's been an integral part of who we are as an organization all along. But saying that and using and actually writing it out explicitly, I think is something that was really necessary given the times we have right now and some of the attacks that have been made on science in recent years. The actual goals I'm not going to show you, but they will be in the Bulletin in the April issue, so they'll be out relatively soon. And I encourage you to read them. It's just a 4-page section of the Bulletin that kind of outlays or lays out the strategic goals and has a little bit about each one of them and how the society is moving forward on those goals. Another aspect of our Centennial is additional initiatives that are happening within the AMS. And again, I want to get back to the Bulletin quickly, but I do want to mention that there are other things that we're doing and other things that are new about AMS and that we'll be launching later this year and as we move into next year, really positioning ourselves to be an organization that's different than we have been, that really reaches for new kinds of objectives and tries to reach audiences in different ways than we have in the past. So we have several different specific initiatives. We're really putting a lot more focus on career development. Today's world is one where people change careers much more frequently. The society can be a resource for our members so that as they work through those career changes and in different paths of careers that we can be helping them through that process from student all the way through their careers. We're working a lot more in terms of trying to provide resources so that people can work at the local level more effectively. Working with our local chapters, working with other local groups so that we can really allow our community to do things at the local level to build resilience and support the Weather Ready Nation initiatives and all those sorts of things that are so important for us these days. We're creating an opportunity for our members, especially people who are at retirement or near retirement, to do volunteer work and provide a portal that will allow our members to sort of see where volunteer opportunities exist and match them up with those, so that people who want to do volunteer work can be able to find those opportunities more effectively. We're going to be working with partner organizations a lot more effectively than we have. We have a lot of international partners that we work with. We're trying to build those relationships, but also nationally, working much more effectively with the National Weather Association, with AGU, with AGI, with other societies around the country, so that all of us can be sharing those resources and really having that be an effective way of getting things done. And we are building a historical research network, which is an opportunity for us to make sure that the history of our science is not lost. And we'll be working with organizations like NOAA's library, libraries around the country. There are lots of organizations that are part of this network It will be distributed. We're not trying to create a museum someplace. We're really saying that these resources exist. We want to make sure that they're linked so that people who want to find historical reference material know how to do that and can do that effectively. We want to be a facilitator for that process. So those are some new initiatives in addition to the things that we've always done, supporting the science in other ways. And built within all of those is a sense of elevating the role of diversity, equity, and inclusiveness. That's an area where we're trying to do a lot more, and we actually are going to be doing some things within the AMS structure that significantly elevates the role of DEI activities across everything that AMS does. We want to be serving the global public in a much more effective way than we have. Again, looking at ourselves as an international organization, not just a nationally based one. And we're going to spend a lot of time looking at how we curate and deliver science. And so even our journals are going to be seeing lots of changes in the coming years as we think about the curation of information as opposed to just the publication of information. So again, it's a different way of thinking about the things we do, taking advantage of the things that we already do really well, but moving them in directions that that really extend those activities. So all of that is part of the Centennial activities. Other part is looking at the bulletin, and so we wanted to create a new formulation for the bulletin that really take advantage of things that we feel need to happen. We know that the population gets its information differently than it used to. It needs to be able to get that information differently. There's a lot of different kinds of information available than had been in the past. All of those things are bundled into rethinking what it is that the Bulletin represents as our member magazine. So we really want to make sure that we're attracting and engaging our reader community effectively, and that we're continuing to be the place where the really important research is published. So we don't want to lose the sense that the Bulletin is a key journal within our field and one that is publishing some of the most important work that's out there. But at the same time, we want to do that in ways that better engage our readership, that better engage especially the younger generation, which is used to getting information in different ways than those of us who are somewhat older are used to getting it. And so that means it's different than just a traditional print magazine. So that's what we've got to be thinking about, is how do we maintain those things we do well, how do we maintain those important things, but also move forward in ways that really allow us to engage that readership in much better ways, and especially to allow our community to sort of access and understand the breadth of activities that are happening, even if individuals are working in fairly narrowly defined areas, so that they see how those pieces fit together, so they get that context of how our science links with other aspects of what's going on. We're doing this by thinking of the Bulletin now as a magazine with 3 channels. It's sort of the phrase that we're using to describe this. We're really thinking of 3 distinct components that bundle together to be BAMS as the Bulletin. The first is an archive of peer-reviewed research, and that's one aspect of it. I'll go into each of these in a little bit more detail. The second is a more traditional magazine, both in print and electronic form or digital form. And the third is a lot more in terms of online presence, connections to social media, things that really take advantage of the mobile platforms that are available for today's readers. So the archive piece of this, the channel that really represents the research archive, is actually going to look very much like it does now. We will still be publishing high impact, important articles on a variety of topics that have gone through a rigorous peer review process. And those will all be available online to the journal's online site, the same as the BAMS articles are now. So they'll continue to be open access. Again, they will go through the peer review process very rigorously the way they do now. We're working to speed that process up to make it faster than it has been in some prior years. And in fact, the peer review process for the Bulletin is actually among the fastest of all of our publications right now. But we're also going to be accelerating the time from acceptance to when the final fully composed articles are published. But just like we do right now, as soon as an article is accepted or a manuscript is accepted, it will be available online as an early online release. So it's a referenceable, citable publication within days of acceptance, just as is true now. So we want to have that be something that doesn't undo the good things that are happening here as we reformulate the Bulletin. So this will continue to be a portion of AMS that really is contributing to high impact factors. So again, it will look very much like what you're used to seeing when you look at Bulletin articles online right now. The one that's going to look a lot different is sort of the Bulletin as the magazine part. It will be a much thinner publication than what we get on our mailboxes now for those of us who get it in print. But both the print and the digital form of BAMS will be a thinner entity each month. And it will be made up of some of the things we're very much used to in the Bulletin. So it will still have a lot of the member components to it. Things like information about upcoming meetings and obituaries and news items and information about our members, all those sorts of things that have been always part of the Bulletin as that member magazine will continue to be there. The thing that's different is that those research articles, those long 20 or 25 page research articles that currently make up the first half to 2/3 of the Bulletin when you look at it, will not be printed as part of that magazine entity. Instead, those are going to be replaced with a condensation or an abridgment of those longer articles. And this is a little hard to describe. It's easy to see and it's hard to describe. So let me see if I can take a crack at that and have that make sense. So if you were to think sort of one end of that spectrum would be to say, okay, we're not going to reprint those large articles that are available online. We'll just put the abstract in and point people to them. But that wouldn't be enough information. So if you just had the abstract for those articles, that wouldn't be enough. It might spark interest for somebody to go into the online archive and find that full research article, but it wouldn't really let them understand what the article was about. So what we're doing is something that's much more than an abstract, but still much less than reproducing the entire article. So we're going to be taking those articles and condensing them or abridging them down to just a few pages. So take maybe a 20-page article and have something that ends up being 3 or 4 pages, still using the material that the author supplied. So in a sense, it's kind of like you would have the introduction and the summary and conclusions and maybe a couple of figures, but rather than just pulling them out and having them maybe not joined together very well, there'll be a process, an editorial process that will stitch that together into a coherent 2 or 3 or 4 pages, rather than just an abstract or something that's 20 pages long. So we'll still be using primarily the author's original words. We will still be using the figures coming from that article, but it'll be something that's a readable short version that kind of gives the main essence of what that article is about. The concept here is what we're looking for is something where all of us can read all of those few pages for each of those articles and learn things about other aspects of the field that we wouldn't have otherwise known. And so if we're working in severe storms and don't know very much about polar meteorology, and there's some great article about polar meteorology, but we don't want to spend the time and the energy to read 20 or 25 pages of that, but we hopefully will want to read 2 or 3 pages and get a sense of what that research is resolving, what questions their research looked into, what kind of results they got, why that's important. And that way really get a better sense of how the other aspects of our field are operating, what the new findings are, what kinds of important things are going on across our field. Our hope is that many of our members will read BAMS cover to cover. I don't think any of us do that anymore, because those big articles that are in there are rarely central enough to our field that we want to read all of them. We may read one or two of them, but we don't read all of them. And yet, each of them, the reason they're in BAMS is because they do have important information, and they're not just so narrowly focused. They should be in one of the other journals. So they really are things that we should know about, but it's hard to do that with what we have right now. So these shorter versions hopefully will allow us a great opportunity to actually do that. The creation of these abridged versions is a non-trivial task, and it's hard to describe exactly what they look like until you've seen one. It's a little hard to visualize how they work, but I will tell you they do work. We've done several samples of them using existing articles, and you do end up with something that's a few pages long, that's very readable, very understandable, and built on the author's original words. And so they really are based very solely on that author. It's not an independent summary of that article. It really is taking the pieces of that article and putting them together in a coherent way. So I think these are going to be really something that's kind of a novel way of looking at these things, and an interesting way of looking at these things. The actual research or the contents still really are represented by the full article, and so these short versions will not be independently referenceable. The reference will always point to that full article, and so we're really trying to make sure that people understand that these abridged versions are ways to get a sense of the article, in a sense skimming the article, but not a replacement for the article itself. And again, there'll be some short articles will be there in their entirety for this new thinner version of the magazine, and there'll be all those other features that we're used to there. So our hope is that we end up with something that's slim, that lands in your mailbox every month, and that you really want to sit down and kind of really go through and really dive into and get excitement about the terrific stuff that's happening across our fields, but also something that that's not such a huge undertaking to actually read cover to cover, or to really sort of digest. The third channel of this is we're calling that a website blog. It's a little more than just that, but the idea here is that we want to take advantage of technology, want to have an opportunity to bridge the content that's happening in the research articles, the kinds of content that's showing up in the magazine, with social media and with the kinds of things you can be doing in today's world with mobile devices and other ways of accessing content. So we're looking at having authors create additional content beyond just the article that they produce. And that can be all kinds of different kind of content. They can be a blog to sort of as a summary or why that research is important. It can be videos about the research, podcasts. We're looking at the possibility of people doing cartoons or flowcharts, or anything that kind of helps people understand how the pieces fit together. And animations or those sorts of things are also can be part of this. Things that really help engage people and understand a couple of things. One, that the research is a very human process. I think we sometimes try to take the humanity out of the research, and having opportunities for authors to show, talk about the process that got them into that research, why they did it, what's important for them about it, things, being able to show videos of them doing the research and how that research gets done. We think all of those things are really going to be important, especially for students and those who are entering the field, but also really for all of us to understand how this work gets done, how people take ideas and move them forward. So it really starts to bring some of the human aspects of the research into what is the scientific process itself, without undermining the sort of gravitas or the or the important aspects of the research paper itself that's part of that research archive. So really just trying to blend those things together. And of course, all these things then really become kind of terrific content for distribution through social media. And again, a way to engage a broader audience, really especially have those who are early career scientists see how these pieces are fitting together, draw them into what the AMS is all about and what the Bulletin is doing, and really kind of, again, engage that audience in new ways and exciting ways. But I think really ways that, as I say, go beyond just trying to, we're not just trying to trick people into reading the articles, we're really trying to say this is more than just articles. And we're also looking at various other components here that I'm sure a lot of the young people in today's scientific community will think of that I haven't thought of. So we're really looking at this as being an expandable or extendable kind of list of activities that can be part of this expansion upon the research component or the other kind of articles that might be part of the BAMS. There's going to be a board of contributors, which will be a volunteer group that has not yet been spun up, but will be spun up soon. And they're going to work with the authors. And so I think when we've talked to some potential Bulletin authors about this, they're a little nervous because they're saying, well, I know how to write a research paper. I don't know how to do any of these other things. But we will have folks that will help them do those things. And it's not, we're not saying that this is a requirement necessarily, but we really are going to try and be encouraging people to find something that works for them. And in some cases, it may be that we will have one of these volunteers as part of the board of contributors interview the author to sort of draw out from them these ideas about how they got into the research they were doing, why it was important to them, how they wanted these things to move forward. And that then becomes part of this expansion or this collection of additional stuff in this third channel of BAMS that really helps to sort of fill in the gaps and bridge these intersecting pieces that are part of what the research enterprise is all about. So again, I think we're trying to have this not be an additional burden for authors, but rather be something where we help draw from them some of the creativity that's latent. I think that they may be too nervous to actually expose in some ways. So all of these things are part of what will be this third channel of this. In some ways, it's the most exciting part because it's not all that well defined and it has sort of boundless capabilities to it. But all these pieces need to fit together in some coherent way. So we really are looking at this new BAMS as being a publication that in some ways will look very much like what you're used to in terms of having significant, important research articles that are high impact, broad appeal, really important papers. We're looking at it having a magazine component that again has some aspects that you're very much used to of news for our members and things that our members care about. But also now building into that the possibility for you to, in a much more efficient and time-sensitive way, to be able to understand and see the other components of what our field is doing in ways that you may not have taken time or energy to try and do in the past. And then this third very exciting component of really exploiting the capabilities of electronic communication and social media and other kinds of activities to really allow the humanity of our science to come forward a little more effectively, but also to really draw people into what is showing up in BAMS and why it's important, and really having the audience understand these issues much more effectively than they have in the past. So with that, this is my last slide. I thought I would close and allow some time for questions. I hope this is something that seems exciting to you, and I hope it's something that that we can move forward on and really have the entire community feel that we've hit the right note here. It will take us a little while to get there. So our plan is to have the new BAMs launch with the January issue this coming year. So that will be the first issue of volume 101. But you know, it will take us a little while to get it to really fully spin up. And so that first issue may not feel quite as different as the issue maybe 4 or 5 months into the year will feel. So it will be a little bit of a spin up there. This is one of those situations where we're changing the tires while the car's still rolling. And so we've got articles in the pipeline now that are more traditional and that we will try to rework into this new form, but there may be some articles that that don't rework quite as effectively as others, but still are important for us to publish. And so some of that stuff may sort of slide into next year. But again, I think we can do a lot of these things kind of right off the bat, starting in January. And I think certainly it will be different enough with that January issue that you will realize this is a different publication than what I've gotten in the past, while still, again, retaining the important aspects of what BAMS has always been for all of us and for the community. So with that, open for questions.
All right. Can we have a round of applause for Dr. Seitter?
Oh, thank you.
Any questions in the room?
Sure.
Just wondering, will the title of the shorter overview be equivalent to that of the longer piece? And I ask in terms of students, for instance, having been asked to read a certain article, they would still cite the main large one. Is it still the aim that the large one be used more for scholarly and citation purposes?
Yeah, so let me restate that question for the folks that are online here. So the question was, is the abridged version of the research article still going to have the same title, so that especially students who are supposed to be looking at that stuff will be citing the full article? And the answer to that is yes, and that's a little tricky in some ways in terms of making sure that happens that way. But the samples that we've done and the structure that we're putting into place would have it be exactly the same title, the same author list. It is the same publication. So it is not a different entity. It will not have a different DOI. It will not have a different citation to it. It is just pieces of that larger one. And so that's why I say it's a little as though, in one thought process, it's a little as though you said, okay, the full article is online, here's the abstract. You would never just reference the abstract, you would be referencing the full article. This is more than just an abstract, but it still is meant to represent that longer article and not replace that longer article. And so I think there's a nuance there and there's a trick there in terms of having something that's readable and understandable for a few pages that gives you a sense of the full article and enough of a sense that it may be all you want to read, but at the same time, it's not replacing that in terms of what you would reference or cite in some other activity, and you still would want to always be looking back to the full article for that full citation. And certainly, if you wanted to really understand what was going on, you would hope that couple of pages or 3 or 4 pages would just kind of spark your interest enough that you would go back and read the 15, 16, 20 page original article.
So the landing page would look different then? It would be here on the landing page, DOI, here's the link to the overview, here is the link to the longer.
So yeah, for the landing page, I think that depends on where you're landing. The Journals Online site, so the actual BAMS article, the full article, probably won't even link to the abridged version. It will only be that the magazine will include the abridged version, which will link back to the full article.
Okay.
But the full article won't be printed anywhere, is that right?
That's right. Yeah, the full article will not be printed. It will only be available online. So it's and so yeah, so that's, and I think that's a big difference from now, in that right now the print bulletin, and there are several thousand people who no longer get the print bulletin, who only get it digitally. But the print bulletin has the full article, as well as having it be online in the archive. We've actually, the online archive has been the official journal for AMS Journals since 1998. So for 20 years, what's in print is not the official journal, but it's still a useful entity. So now we're just acknowledging the fact that that we will not, that online version is the official journal, and the print will not include that full article. So that is a big difference. It's a very big difference, actually.
It sounds like in many ways you're going back for the main piece of it, back to where it was 50 years ago, because many years ago there weren't many really articles in it. It was mostly member stuff and so on, meetings and stuff like that. And so it has grown over the last few years to have a lot of articles like that. And you're kind of taking them out now.
Yeah, so the question is, the sense that we've maybe gone back to what the Bulletin was 50 years ago, where it didn't have many articles. I think that in some sense that's correct. And if you go way back, and if you look at what the Bulletin was in the 30s and 40s especially, the Bulletin included short summaries of important papers that showed up in other journals. So if you go back, and especially in the 30s, I think, you can find sort of one-page summaries of important articles that were in the Monthly Weather Review or some of the other journals that were around at that time. So in some sense, this is a little like that. That you're saying, if you read the Bulletin, you find out important stuff that's being published, important research that's being done, and at the same, but at the same time, having that reference the full article for those people who want to go and read the full article, but they don't need to. If they just want to know kind of what the gist of something was, they can read the Bulletin and get enough of that information. But if they want to dig deeper, then they would go back to the full article. So yeah, I think you're right. It is, in some sense, it's a little bit like that.
So you say there's going to be kind of three parts of this. Are all three parts going to be sort of a one thing together, or are they going to be completely separate, or what?
So yes, the question is there three parts? Are they one thing or three things? We're treating them as one thing. So we're saying there is a single BAMS, but it's made up of these components. And so in some sense, and in fact, the archive version, I think, as we're envisioning it, would have the full articles and that other content that shows up in the magazine. And so that online version actually will have all of that stuff. It's so that is sort of all of BAMS. But then this third channel, this sort of blog and social media and that kind of stuff, in some sense, that's sort of like a significant extension of what we have now as supplements to BAMS. So, but we are treating this all as part of BAMS. So it's all part of our member magazine, even though it has these pieces that are all connected, but are coming at you from different angles. A little hard to describe. I think it'll be easier to live in than it is to describe in some ways. Yeah.
So then, will the tweets and the blog links be in the margin of the article, the full version of the article, or maybe the shorter version?
So the question is whether the tweets and other things that are happening in social media end up getting attached to the articles. That's a terrific question. I don't think we've envisioned it that way initially.
will help us to explain research and what's behind the research, outside of the ivory tower type thing, but also integrate the different disciplines. So I think this is something that research programs are kind of doing it on their own, so you will help making some of this happen. One question that I have is whether your abridged version will include a plain language abstract, because that's something we actually often just have to create so that we can put out some kind of news article about things. So I'm wondering if that's going to be basically done for us. I know AGU can do that already.
Yep. So yeah, so I'll summarize your comments. One, that you think it's exciting that we're doing this because it allows us to explain how research is done more effectively. But the question is whether the articles will have plain language abstracts with them. We are envisioning plain language abstracts with those, and we're also envisioning those to be added to the journals as well. And then beyond that, we've been working with Kudos, which is another way of getting plain language versions of things out and allowing different kinds of discoverability for research results. And so that's another kind of another avenue for authors to get a plain language version out, increase their discoverability for their research, link back to research in different ways. And so the one plain language abstract is one that we would control, and that would actually be reviewed by the peer review process, just like the article is. The Kudos abstracts are ones that are created by the authors, and the authors have full control over, and can actually modify at some later date if they feel that's a useful thing to do. Whereas the reviewed plain language abstract that we would actually publish would be set after it's gone through the peer review process. So those things are actually in play right now, and I'm not exactly sure when the journals one's going to be released, when those author requirements will go out, but that's in process right now. So all those things are happening. Yes.
Who would make these condensed versions of the articles? Will there be an editorial staff at the AMS that does that?
Yes. So the question is who is making these abridged or condensed versions, and that will be done by staff working with the author group. And so the way it's envisioned now is that we will have staff. We have staff who will be creating these. They will the abridged version would then be passed back to the authors for their review to make sure that they feel the staff has adequately stitched together those pieces for them. And our hope is that in most cases that's a fairly straightforward process. It's never super easy. Our test cases so far have indicated that it takes a person about a day to take an article and create this abridged version. But we've staffed at a level that will allow us to do that for the research articles that we publish every month. But there are some articles that we've looked at where it's hard to take the author's words and pull out chunks of those and kind of mend them together in a way that makes sense. And in those cases, we're going to have to do a little bit more editorial work and do a little bit more to sort of summarize sections of the article so that it will look a little different and have more new words as opposed to only stitching together the author's original words. So it'll be a little bit more of a condensation as opposed to an abridgment. Again, in both those cases, that will be a staff function that the authors have an opportunity to review and approve before we consider them done.
So would you typically have one AMS staff worker work on each article at one time, or would there be a team of AMS staff members on the editorial board working on a given article along with the authors?
Okay, so the question is whether we would have a single staff person work on each article or a team. I think we're still working on that a little bit. The ones we've done as test cases have had a single individual create the abridged version, but we're really still working through that workflow. And I think we'll have to try some things and experiment a little bit and find out what works the most effectively. And we do have some disciplinary diversity within the staff that has the capabilities for this, and so it may be that you know, in some cases, having somebody that's got a little bit more expertise in a particular subject area will help them compared to some other areas. So again, I think we're still piecing some of those pieces together. We've got about 6 or 8 months to get that fully sorted out, but hopefully we can come up with a good, clean, efficient way to get that done.
One more question.
Sure.
About how many of these abridged articles do you anticipate you will have in any given month?
If you look at the Bulletin now, we publish, I'd say, ballpark about 10 research articles a month. So I think we're looking at numbers like that. So again, in terms of that staffing, you know, that's 10 or 12 or so person days to do the abridgment process. So it's not an unreasonable workload for that workflow, but it's still significantly more than what we're doing now. So yeah, but I think it's that 10 to a dozen per month kind of thing. You know, in the current BAMs, we also have the shorter submissions, things that are what we call map room, or you know, some of the other shorter submissions. Those will happen the way they happen now. So those won't be, we won't have an abridged version of something that's only a page or two long to begin with. It's those longer research articles that will really have that shorter abridged version that will be part of the magazine part. Yeah.
What about the option of asking the author to produce a 4-pager or a 3-pager abridged version? Would that work, or is that too much of a burden on the author?
So the question is it reasonable to ask the author to create the 3 or 4-page abridged version? I think we would love to have authors do that. Yes. And I think over time that may become a more reasonable expectation. As to say, when we've talked to authors, existing authors and potential authors, they have not been enthusiastic about trying to do that themselves. And I think they're adamant that they want to review what gets done, which makes sense, of course. But I think for many people that's a tough thing to do. I think all of us find that. I mean, most of us, when we've written up our research, the part that we struggle with the most is the abstract. Trying to take something that where we think everything we wrote is important and condense that down to 300 words can be really challenging. Taking something that's you know, 15 or 20 pages long and saying, okay, now I want to distill this down to 3 or 4 pages is also a really challenging thing to do. To say what 2 or 3 figures, what handful of paragraphs really get the essence of this across is not an easy thing to ask authors to do. I think once they start seeing these, you know, a couple of years from now, when they've been seeing these routinely in BAMs, I would be very surprised if we don't have authors that submit their own versions with their articles, because they want to maintain that high level of control over what has their name attached to it. So I think as people get used to it, it will become something that they are happy to do themselves. But right now, I think they're a little nervous about that. Similarly, they're very nervous about you know, creating a video or a podcast or something like that, because that's often not part of their skill set. But at the same time, I think if we have a group of people who are willing to work with them, then that becomes something where we're not trying to add a burden to the author. We're really trying to draw out of the author things that they would love to tell us, things that they would love to have an opportunity to say in new and different ways. And so we're really hoping that goes very smoothly as well. And I think, again, based on the experience of people we've talked to and gotten some input from, I'm expecting that to also be one where initially we have to do a lot of help with authors, a lot of guidance for them, and a lot of things for them. Whereas over time, we will have authors more and more doing those things up front and submitting that as part of their package that they submit to be part of BAMS. But that will take some while. It's getting used to that and seeing what other people have done and saying, wow, I could have done that, and actually then doing it. So. Yeah.
Let me ask you a little bit different question.
Sure.
What's the status with the AMS and with the industry in general of making sure that what is online today is always going to be accessible, and say readable, and so forth, 200 years from now?
Okay, so yeah, the question is about the archive and the preservation of the online archive. That's been an important issue for us all along. It's very important for the library community. The librarians worry about that kind of stuff a lot. AMS has always been part, was from the time we initially took our journals online, we've been part of some of the independent initiatives that maintain that preservation. So there's an organization called Portico that we submit all of our content to. It's an independent organization that takes all of the raw content that we have in machine readable form and preserves that. And so it preserves it as SGML or now XML. And so that machine readable versions are maintained in the Portico databases. We are also part of LOCKSS, which is an acronym that stands for Lots of Copies Keeps Stuff Safe. And the LOCKSS initiative, again, is a library-based initiative where research libraries around the country make sure that all of them are keeping copies of all this stuff so that nobody's dependent on the publisher's database or having one specific database or archive to make sure that you keep track of that stuff. And then more recently, we've been part of CLOCKSS, which is kind of one level up from LOCKSS I can't remember what the C stands for, but it's kind of a more robust way of keeping lots of electronic copies. And each of these stores things in different ways and in different formats. So the Portico formats are, again, preserved in SGML, which means that all of the content actually is ASCII text, but ASCII text that's tagged, so it can be reconfigured into the fully composed pages. LOCKSS keeps the material in a bit more of a graphical type format, which is a little bit more dependent on specific rendering programs than the Portico versions. But again, having lots of different versions of this, and again, all of these things are independent from AMS and independent from all the other publishers. So in that sense, it's playing the same kind of role that libraries have always played, of each of them having copies of things, so that if a library happens to burn down, that doesn't mean some manuscript is lost for humanity. It's always going to be there because there's lots of versions of it around, and things are stored in lots of different ways. So there's a lot of redundancy in those systems. So yeah, that's been an important part of that. So I think in that context, I think we can feel comfortable and confident that the online or the digital databases that make up our journals will be readable 100 years or 200 years from now, and that they will be preserved in the same way that print copies have always been preserved through the efforts of libraries.
And we have time for one more question, if anyone else had anything they wanted to ask. Okay, well, that will conclude our brown bag for today. So thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you all. It's great to be here.